Hello, everyone. Fantabulous Thursday today. I hope everyone is doing well and all of you are doing safe. Today's series or today's episode is a special edition I'm doing on rethink culture and on hardship. The reason why I wanted to do this is because of to show support and to show respect to the current climate that we are experiencing, right? Even though we are experiencing BLM in the current landscape, it speaks a lot to how we are existing as a society, in our society, at homes, at work, in our schools as well. And this is such a timely conversation to have about diversity, about discrimination. And I'm not the only one who's going to be speaking alone. I have got 5 other fantastic humans with me, and let me bring them on so we can explore their beautiful mind and beautiful hearts. So let me add them to the stream. All right, welcome, ladies, welcome. Really grateful that all of you have joined us. So let's go around and introduce. Could you go around and introduce your name, what you do, and how are you feeling right now?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Shireen Simon. I am a senior product manager. I work for Staples Canada. This is new to me, so I'm very excited and grateful to be a part of the conversation. So thank you for inviting me. And I'm just here to give my opinion and talk about solutions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie de Guzman, and I am an Agile project manager at Rogers. I'm also the co-founder of Rogers Women in Technology, and I am a public speaker and a mentor.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here along with other powerful women in this space. And my name is Gia Gutierrez, and I am an operations and program manager for the University of Wisconsin Parkside, where I work in higher education, and I'm feeling empowered to be able to share the space.
Hi everyone, this is Ramya here. I'm so excited and thankful to be a part of today's discussion. And I'm currently based in Melbourne. I'm originally from Singapore, and I'm currently building up my career engagement coaching practice. So my professional background has always been in recruitment and executive search. So I'm happy to be a part of this, and hopefully we can all work towards solutions. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nadeja. I also go by Deja, and I oversee employer partnerships in the San Francisco market on behalf of Flatiron School. And I'm so excited to be here today to invoke change and to, most importantly, be the change that we wish to see in the world. So thank you so much, Mila, for inviting me, and I look forward to sharing some amazing correspondence today.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. It is such an enabling space and an empowering space to have 5 other diverse women, right? And when I talk about diverse, it's just not about our skin color. It's about our backgrounds. We are from different parts of the world. We are of different backgrounds in terms of the work that we do, our mindset and thought processes as well. So I feel enabled today, empowered today. So I'm really excited. So to start the conversation, right, with the current landscape, discrimination has been arising for years, but right now it is arising tremendously and quickly like a tsunami. And it is up to us, up to each of us to build a sustainable culture, because with the imbalance of equity, with people of color, with people of, women of color as well, right? Opportunities, treatments at the workplace fall under the category of toxicity, right? And even how women treat each other as well. So we're going to touch on various facets of, what kind of discrimination is present in the workspace, how that transfers even within the subcategory of being women, how discrimination falls under women as well. So I want to talk about, what is the idea of equity? When we talk about equity, a lot of people say, oh yeah, equality, but I want to really understand what equity is, and from each of your perspective, from each of your diverse background, from the work that you are doing. And let's start with that, and then we'll dive into what does equity mean for women and being a woman of color. So I'm opening up the floor. What does equity look like? Would anyone like to start? Shireen?
Someone else can go first. It's fine.
I'll go ahead and start. So for me, I know personally that equality means equal opportunity. And I think, when we're talking about underrepresented groups in corporate America specifically, and the systemic barriers that have been enforced and put in place for so long, we have to pay attention to the ways in which we are opening avenues and channels to provide our colleagues access to equal opportunities. And it's tricky when using the word equal opportunities. I think a lot of times it initially can be interpreted as like anti something else, right? And it's like, no, that's not the goal here, right? When we say equality, we just mean that we want those that don't have primary representation in the workspace to have a voice and to have access to leadership and promotion and growth, the same way in which, our counterparts or our colleagues do. And that really starts on so many levels, right? Now that we are looking at the years and centuries of systemic oppression that has happened in America specifically, it's kind of hard to gauge, where do we start? I know a lot of people have been battling with that. And so there's the top-down approach, right? Where we could say, okay, we need leadership to change up its board and bring some people of color or, different genders and backgrounds. But then there's also a very powerful, I think, bottom-up dynamic that is just as effective. And those are the people that are on the front lines, and we are the faces of these corporations. And what can we do to foster and uproot that change to those top-level leaders that we want to see diversify the board? So I'll pass it on to whoever wants to take the mic from that point, but
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay, go ahead.
So I definitely want to echo, some of the things that you mentioned, Deja, and specifically, I think the very key word that you mentioned when it comes to equity, it's change, right? It's change, and it's about the impact that change has, and it's oftentimes challenging the norm, right? It's challenging what are the different social and structures that are already in place, and how you're able to stir that pot, right, to make it equitable for everyone. And so I think part of equity for me means being able to take a stand, being able to be at the forefront and willing to stir that pot.
And first off, I absolutely love this panel. So just to add on to what you both said, I think it's also like giving people the choice whether they want to do X, Y, and Z. But I don't even think that's enough, is giving them the choice, but also giving them the tools that they need in order to succeed. Because if you think about it, if you've gone so many centuries, decades, years without the choice, you may not have that foundation in order to say, like, take that leadership role. So if we give them a place at the table and a choice to be there, but also the tools that they need in order to, like, build them up, like, that's completely needed.
I wouldn't mind joining, putting in a 2 cents here. Also, I think it's also recognizing when they already have the tools and they're putting out the effort. Time and time again, I have conversations with close friends or colleagues where they just feel discouraged because they are putting in the time. They're really either taking the courses or joining programs or just venturing out to events so that they can become more knowledgeable. But yet they don't feel like they're getting the recognition that they've done the work. Even if it's like from a revenue standpoint, you work for a company and you're bringing in so much revenue for the company, you're passionate about what you do, but you're not seeing any progress or any growth in your career. I mean, it's discouraging. And then you don't necessarily want to branch out, or you're too discouraged to branch out. So it's really changing recognition and making that pretty equal across the board for everyone. I feel like that's been a prime conversation I've been having this week with a lot of colleagues.
That's beautiful, Sean. I'm gonna go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So the way I look at equality and equity is that I remember coming across, this cartoon at some point in time. So what it shows is you have two boys who are picking apples in a tree. I think some of us might have seen this, right? So two trees, and the boys are trying to pick the apples up the tree, and one is taller than the other. So one of them actually has more apples. He is able to reach for more apples, and the smaller one, he is actually stuck. So the thing is, you have like equal opportunities, equal resources, but one of them has access to more. So if you were to look at it in today's corporate context, so this is what is happening. So we are realizing that equality alone is not enough. We need to have fairness in our approach. We need to be fair. So everyone needs to have fair and equal access to opportunities. So one way of looking at it, I feel, is that when you're talking about diversity, inclusion issues, I think it's never fully complete when the equity aspect is actually not considered, which means like the intersectional differences and the cross-cultural differences are not fully considered in a wider context. So that's how I'm looking at it. Yeah.
Just to piggyback really quick, especially working in the education sector and advocating for the students who, face barriers when it comes to access to even quality education a lot of times, right? And I think it's so easy from, a very disconnected and high level view to say, oh, well, I pulled myself up by the bootstraps, right? I made it happen. So I don't understand why X, Y, and Z can't do it. And understanding that, there are, quite frankly, just certain socioeconomic barriers that are put in place before a person is even brought into this world, right? And so then what do they do with what they know? You don't know what you don't know, right? And so it's like, how do you make sure that these students have access to pathways that diverge from the ways in which, their society as it's currently functioning could be destructive to opportunities for growth?
Very beautiful minds today, and I love all the points that all of you have highlighted. So I'm going to touch on some of the points that I took notes on. So Melanie, you mentioned about tools to succeed, and Shireen, you shared that you have been having lots of conversations this week where your colleagues have been sharing that even though they have the tools, they are putting in the time. It's like climbing an escalator, right? Climbing an escalator which is going downwards. So it's like you're going down, but you're trying to climb up and up and up, and you're stagnant. So that's one huge gap and barrier that I have been noticing as well. And to Ramia's point, taking into the cross-cultural perspective, I used to work in Singapore and Malaysia as well. And this is a global phenomenon. And I'm going to say COVID is not going to kill us. I feel like the virus of discrimination is killing us today. So I want to come and touch onto the point of access, right? How do we create access? But before we touch on access, I want to get onto a vulnerable level right now. Have you, if you are willing to share, have you experienced discrimination as a POC and as a woman?
I think we would be lying to say if we haven't, right? Because we know that there's unconscious bias towards women, there's unconscious bias towards people of color, and we're both. So absolutely, and it's something that first you need to kind of be made aware of these unconscious biases to know that they're there, because sometimes if you just live the life, you don't know anything different. But when you actually sit down and you take a look around you, and you're wondering why your male colleagues are being promoted at a faster rate than you, even though that you are part of the community, you're taking all those courses, you're doing your best to be a leader in the industry, but your own company isn't recognizing that. There's a reason. And like, you would hate, you would hate to use play the card of, hey, I'm a woman, or hey, I'm a person of color, but really that is our reality. And until we have those conversations with those people in the leadership roles to make them realize what their unconscious bias are, we're just going to be spinning in circles.
Anyone would like to share?
So one of the things that I can share is, I think aside from being in a situation in which you are faced with discrimination, or it becomes very evident, that you're not being compensated in a way that your counterparts are, your colleagues are, I think the power that comes from that is also being able to walk away from something. And so, for example, in my specific situation, in the position of employment where I was really, always meeting expectations, and if anything, exceeding those expectations. And I came to find out that my previous, the person that was in the position previous to me was making far more money than I was, and of course was a male, and it definitely was very heartbreaking at first, because I was trying to understand what approach I could take to be able to ask some questions, right? And then who to ask those questions to. But more importantly, I think once you approach that conversation and you're confronted with the hard responses to those questions and saying, well, there's nothing that can be done. As a woman, as a person of color, we have to be able to know our worth and walk away. Because then at that point you realize, there's no point in me being able to give my full 100% if I'm not able to be compensated fairly. And I think that's something that is very important for us as women, for us as minorities, to realize that we are worth just as much.
I wouldn't mind sharing an experience that's not necessarily mine, but I witnessed. I was working with an organization, and I was fairly new to that organization. And a colleague on my team, we had a very small team, and a colleague on my team was an Asian lady. We would get into these team meetings. Our team was probably 3 associates and 1 director. And we were all at the management level, but not managing people. And she's a very bright lady. They would get into arguments in our team meetings that would escalate. It was extremely inappropriate, to the point where derogatory slurs were being kind of battled back and forth. And it was really like, I have 3 degrees. I don't deserve this behavior. And his response would be like, I don't care how many degrees you have, right? And I thought, okay, I'm new. I don't really know, how do I interject into this conversation? How do I, speak up and kind of defend her that, first of all, this is really inappropriate. And then, my other colleague, it's a Caucasian man, and we would be messaging each other, how do we get out of this? How do we get out of this boardroom? So time went by. I believe she reported it to HR. It actually went on for a bit. She found another job. She moved on, right? So kudos to her for recognizing her value and what she shouldn't tolerate. And as my role developed, I found myself in the same situation with the same manager. And I thought, okay, the first time that it happened in a team meeting. The room was a little changed. So there was the same Caucasian guy, there was another Black guy on the team, and then there was our director. And I found myself in the same situation with him kind of targeting me about information that I did not know. And I thought, okay, I didn't even I could ask about that information, right? We left the meeting, and we were kind of all getting back to our offices, and one guy walked with me and he was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I've never seen that before. And I thought, yeah, I wonder why. Like, this type of behavior is not acceptable. So me being the outspoken person that I am, and not really tolerating too much. I mean, I joke around a lot, but there's a time when you have to draw the line about, this is not a joke, this is inappropriate. So I decided to call a one-on-one. We sat down in the boardroom and I started to discuss that, what happened the other day was inappropriate. We're not in that environment. And there's certain things that you shouldn't be saying to your employees. And unfortunately, he didn't take it seriously. So there was a lot of eyeball rolling. There was a lot of sarcasm coming out of him, to the point where I had to take off my glasses, put down my pen, sit back, and just really slow down my tone and say, if I'm doing a bad job, you can tell me that. It's not what you say to me, it's how you say it to me, right? So that's one thing. Let's just get that out of the way, right? But secondly, you really need to start taking my words seriously, because if you don't take my words seriously, somebody else will. So he didn't hear the first time, and I literally just said the same thing. And then I think he got it. So I think it's like being able to recognize that something's happened, kind of sort out your feelings, remove the personal away from it, and then figure out, okay, how do I approach this again? These things might happen. People will make mistakes, right? You got to be able to push past it as an individual, because you may experience it over and over and over, right? Unless you're just never dealing with people, right? And you can't control how people will treat you for whatever reason, but you can only control how you respond. So you do need to have that confidence to stick up for yourself, and defend yourself, and then just make sure that you're executing appropriately. And if that doesn't work, if you're not ready to walk away, then you got to be ready to like have difficult conversations at a different level over and above that person. That's it.
Hi. If I were to add in as well, so I come in from a recruitment executive search background, and I would say that every industry has got its prejudice and certain biases, but coming in from a hiring practice, it was one of the most biased professions that I have personally witnessed, because on a day-to-day basis, whatever resumes that come in, sometimes I have seen recruiters just toss a particular CV aside without even looking into it, simply because of the name or the ethnicity of that person, which is very, very disappointing. So I had made it like my mission to be that recruiter, who actually serves with a heart, or who has a purpose when it comes to hiring, because I was so sick and tired of some of these, hiring practices. And what I have personally seen is jokes made along the lines of, racial discrimination or certain derogatory terms that have been tossed around liberally and without even thinking about the people who are present in the room. So, and what was even more disappointing was that managers and leaders were supposed to be standing up against these, this kind of jokes and such. They would just kind of ignore it because work was getting done, and that's what mattered to them. So I think that's typically the problem here, because managers, some of these managers, they don't see the the importance of what it means to someone from underrepresented minority groups to actually work in a respectful, inclusive work culture, and the importance of working behind that. So it happens even in Asian countries like in Singapore, and even outside as well, obviously. So on a personal level, I still remember like years ago when I went for an interview at a consulting firm. So the person who interviewed me was a lady herself. And this woman, she actually asked me pointedly, at that point in time, I wasn't married. So she was asking me, are you going to be married? Are you going to have kids? And I'm like telling myself, whether I get married or not, whether I have kids or not, how is it going to affect this role, you know? So suffice to say, I of course, I wasn't interested in that position at all. But what I'm trying to say is that there are so many of these, you know, ingrained attitudes and practices that's coming in. And it's really disappointing when A, managers and leaders do not see this, and B, it's really disappointing when women tend to discriminate other women as well. So in my case, it was like that.
Oh, you know, I will say that for me, and I think there's so many grieving stages when you are a minority, especially a Black woman, when it comes to realizing just so many unbiased prejudices that you deal with. And a lot of things don't really hit you until after the fact. And so, you know, I know early on in my career, one of my old positions, I was, I don't want to say tokenized, but it was pretty apparent that that's what it was. And this wasn't even just this company in particular. This was a repetitive pattern where I, you know, just little comments like, wow, you are so articulate. And, you know, me thinking fresh out of college, right? And, you know, I got my first big girl job. I'm thinking, this is great. These people are telling me I'm well-spoken. Like, you know, this is something to be proud of. And, you know, it's just because I was not aware at the time that, you know, I needed to analyze, like, where's that comment coming from? And why is it so surprising to you that my vernacular, the way in which I communicate with everybody in my life, is something that needs to be called out? I'm not an orator. I'm not a public speaker. And so it started with little things like that. And then it would, in fact, I remember being in a position in which I actually had a male manager at the time. Again, not paying attention. He actually told me explicitly, hey, Deja, you know, when you talk to, you know, people, maybe you should try toning it down a bit. You know, you're very smart and you're by far one of the smartest people on the team. But I think, you know, when you come off, you know, when you speak to people, you come off as a little bit aggressive and intimidating. So I think that if you can just, you know, switch your approach up a bit and just be more relaxed, you know, and I'm thinking, oh, this is great, you know, sales advice. Like, he's coaching me, he's grooming me. And I remember coming home and telling my boyfriend at the time what had happened, and he was infuriated. And he's like, what? That is not okay. And it broke me to my core, because aside from just that isolated incident in itself, this is something that happens all the time. You know, grappling between, you know, how do I still be the assertive person I know myself to be? I'm a strong-headed woman, you know, and I'm not changing that. I'm not dimming that down or watering that down to make anyone, you know, more comfortable about themselves or taking on their own projections of their insecurities. And I think, you know, Gia and Shireen, did I say that right, Shireen? You both ended on the note of, and all of you ladies, really, we have to hold ourselves accountable. And in so many ways, we have to find the balance of being aware of the systems that are in place that are not our fault, but deviating away from this victim, this crippling victim mentality, and reclaiming the space and the voices that we do have. And that is the only way that we're going to shake the table, no matter who's uncomfortable with it, by the way. So yeah,
those are magnificent. These are just brilliant thoughts from all of you. And from hearing all of you speak, you know, we uncovered so many different themes that are part of the discrimination umbrella, right? There's, like, Ramya, you mentioned about, you know, like, so many recruiters, they dismiss resumes just by seeing the names, right? And I have experienced that when I used to be in the APAC region, where people would say, oh, you speak fluent English. Even like Singapore is a melting pot. And I've heard that when I was living over there. Or you speak good English. Like, you know, and I could not like assimilate those narratives which was told to me, right? Or even, and you spoke about even women, like women treating each other poorly. And I had experienced that because there's multi-layers, right? If you are a colored woman, even in Asia or even in a melting pot country or city, colorism within women comes about. And I've experienced that all my life. the melanin in my skin is not my fault. I'm proud of the melanin in my skin. But to some people who can't understand the melanin in me, I don't know if it's fear or rejection, the refusal to accept how someone else is or someone else is created. But I've experienced colorism in deep levels, right? Even within Asian communities. I read a research recently, and there was a research video out on YouTube about unconscious bias even in India, right? India is South Asia, and it was eye-opening for me, even how North Indians treat South Indians based on the color of their skin, even though they're all from India. And that's the same concept in countries like Malaysia, Singapore, or like multi-Asian countries, right? I personally had witnessed someone else get yelled at by a Chinese Asian yelling at a Malay lady because they are somehow perceived to be lesser as subhumans. And these are the kind of treatments that are going on in other parts of the world that translates really well in the US and even in Europe, right? And to Nadisha's point, you spoke about it, like, oh, you speak really great English, but those are microaggressions, which are still aggressions in the form of dismissive narratives. I want to identify dismissive narratives right now in order to start dismantling discrimination. What does dismissive narratives look like to you, so our viewers and listeners can get awareness as to how we can dismantle this discrimination? Anyone would like to start?
So the question of the microaggressions, right? And the unconscious biases. It's something that, once you, like what Deja was saying, that first it just felt like she was being mentored. And then when she went back and she was like, 1 second, they were actually just telling me not to be myself. And especially like when it comes to women doing that to other women, it hits a little bit differently because you feel like they should be on your side. But when you take a step back and then you look, like, hear their words, they're actually trying to chip you down so they build themselves up. And those are kind of really sad to, or like, when you come to realization, it's really sad to hear. But also, like, I forget who was speaking about Ramya, when you're talking about when you had your interview and all of a sudden, like, they ask, like, are you getting married? Are you having a baby? What's your kids like? First of all, that's none of your business. But also, you don't want that information to count against you. And I feel that, like, when you reach a certain age, you're just assumed that you're going to be, like, leaving the workforce to raise a family and to start that, and you'll need to be taking the mat leave and everything. But that doesn't impact the value of you and the work that you bring to the company. And it's just, there's just so many levels on top of that.
I feel that microaggressions, sometimes they derive from insecurities. And I think Deja touched on that as well. I think it's just a projection of maybe insecurities that are felt within themselves. I think everybody has insecurities. So you really need to, one, get comfortable with your own insecurities and work on improving yourself so that when you are faced with, hey, you're not doing this, or you're faced with microaggressions, you can kind of respond to it, but also not take it personally, right? Recognize what's actually happening to you or what situation you're currently in and respond to that. I found myself in a situation at an organization where the team manager tend to have team meetings every once in a while, like a team building at their place, at their home. And it was fine. I went there. I was also fairly new to this company, and a different company, thankfully. One of their friends and I had joked around earlier, right? And we had that session. Fine. I left. I didn't realize that they started talking about me after I left. 2 days later, the conversation with my manager, who was also a minority, was that I'm being aggressive, that some of the team members find me aggressive. And I recognized exactly what was happening right away. So I was like, oh, here we go again. First, let's address the fact that I'd like to know what particular situation you're referring to, right? Because if you can't give me the example or the basis where that was perceived as an aggression, I'm just going to dismiss this conversation. That's one. We're going to start there, because without having context to my reaction, then you may not even know the whole story. So how about we start with what you're actually talking about, which was never presented. Okay, fine. So then my next thing is, I find this really awkward or funny that you would say this to me, because if I was a male, you would be telling me how assertive I am. You'd be patting me on my back, right? Like you would really be giving me the credentials for everything I'm doing. I'm a go-getter. But here I am, a female. You're a female, but yet we find ourselves here where you're labeling me as that angry Black girl, right? So now I cannot react to whatever you're saying, because I will be perceived as that angry Black girl, right? Or the angry Black woman, right? So now I have to kind of watch myself. Well, you've also put me on eggshells. So now I have to watch how I behave around the team. I'm new to this company. How did we get here so quickly? Only to find out that he just felt he was able to joke around and give jokes, but he wasn't able to take jokes. And I thought, okay, and this is your best friend? And you're having this conversation after I leave with everybody else? So there's a lot of inappropriate things happening here that needs to be addressed. But what I found really funny was I left the company. Things evened out and everything like that. And I left the company, and, I still stay in touch with that particular manager. And I said, hey, how are you doing? And one day she said, oh, how's your new company? How are you doing over there? I said, everything's great. And she said, how are you with your team? And I thought, okay, you really need to start identifying these microaggressions that you are projecting on people. The team is fine. I am fine. I hope you're doing well. Talk to you later. Like, I don't know why people feel so comfortable projecting and not recognizing what they're doing, right? And how they're making other people feel. So sorry, I'll let somebody else jump in.
So the topic of microaggressions, I know that I can only speak for myself, but I know recently when I've been processing, all of the events that have been happening in the public outcry, following the death, the very public and viral death and killing of George Floyd, I had to take a moment to just be still. And in that moment, it was really difficult for me to be still, because I still had this sense of FOMO, right? Like, I'm supposed to be, showing up in my work and sending out articles every day and telling everyone, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do these things, right? And once that FOMO kind of died down and I looked inward, I was like, where is that stemming from? Where is that stemming from, right? And so it took me back, and I don't know where this came from, but I remember when I used to go to the grocery store with my grandma as a little girl. And, I would see the white kids, essentially, they were usually white kids in the grocery store, being kids, being innocent kids, doing what kids are supposed to do, and that's laugh and run around and play hide and seek and, have joy. And I remember, seeing that, and I was like, oh, I want to play with the kids, like I'm going to run or, just act silly. And my grandma, every single time I even attempted, she would pull me aside and she would tell me in my ear, and this is a Black woman, a woman telling me this, right? Don't you embarrass me in front of these white people. And that was a narrative that was ingrained in me from probably, as early as I can remember, 4 or 5 years old. right? And so when we're talking about microaggressions that are perpetuated by women on women, we have to look at why that system was put in place, right, to begin with. Because although, you know, at the time I would say, Grandma, you know, what do you mean? Like, that you're being unfair, you're being mean, like you're not letting me do what other kids are doing. She was very well intentioned in her communication and what she was instructing, in the ways in which she was instructing me to, you know, quite frankly, behave in a society where she knew my safety was not prioritized the same way in which my white colleagues were, just because their skin were lighter. And she also knew that the ways in which I chose to show up in society, you know, that same innocent, fun joy, I would be the destructive Black kid that's making a ruckus, that's messing things up. Get your kid, take care of your child. You're an unfit mom, you're an unfit grandmother, right? So we have to think about, you know, and this is no way absolving women of those microaggressions, but in so many ways, we've kind of been, it's this weird dynamic where we haven't really been able to come together the same way in which men have historically, because powers and systems have been in place to allow them to do that. Look at our presidential history, right? There are no women that look like us that have ever been president, right? So we've, in a sort, have kind of been pitted against each other in positive ways where we're like, let me look out for you, you know, don't do this, or, you know, that may, you know, warrant a bad outcome. And also in ways where it's like, we know there's only 1 or 2 seats for us at the table, right? Because they're not creating it. So what does that do? That instills self-hate, insecurities in women, instead of us being able to come together and say, we're all intelligent, we're all fantastic, and we know that there's a plethora of opportunities for us to take advantage of. So I think it's honestly a byproduct of this hegemonic system that is in place.
Yeah, just to add in, I completely empathize and totally, I feel, you know, what the rest of us here are saying, because to a large extent, I've also gone through and experienced my fair share of racial profiling, and, you know, how I should be looking or acting as appropriate to, you know, from my ethnic group. So even though Singapore is a really peaceful and safe country, and to be very honest, I think in terms of what others have gone through, probably mine is probably just like a fraction of it. But having said that, I've still, you know, faced discrimination and certain levels of like racial stereotyping. The way I look at it is that for microaggression is something that's based on preconceived stereotypes, and how someone from a majority race group would actually want to put us underrepresented minority groups into those boxes and make sure that we actually fit into those boxes. So when we don't entirely fit into those boxes, then they get like a shock. And they are like wondering, okay, so why is this person so different? And it also comes from their own ignorance. They don't have friends who look like us or who act like us, and when they come across someone like us in a workplace situation, that's when the tables are reversed and they have a tough time understanding. So a lot of it is to do with, you know, like what Deja actually mentioned, it's stemming from childhood experiences as well. The narratives that a child can actually receive, you know, whether you're coming in from an underrepresented minority group or whether you're coming in from someone from a majority group, it can really influence the way you think, and it really carries you, in various aspects of your life later on. So that is, to me, I think the most powerful thing that's affecting microaggression, the narratives that are told onto ourselves and by others, how it's going to be imposing on us. Yeah.
Very beautifully shared, everyone. And, you know, I echo all of your voices. You know, I have experienced discrimination, not just in the United States, but being in different parts of the world as well. And it's interesting to see how those kind of cultures, those kind of narratives, the culture of dismissive narrative, right? The culture of discrimination against women, discrimination against POCs, it's transferable, because when cultures are created, it isn't just created in a vacuum, or isn't just created in a one-dimensional plane, or isn't just created in a room that belongs exclusively for someone, right? When cultures are created, at home, it transfers into the neighborhood, it transfers into the playground, it transfers into the society, into the workplaces. Like to Ramia's point, whatever narrative that has been introduced to a child, right? That child brings those narrative into the playground. I've seen children say, hey, you can't play with me. I have witnessed children looking at other black kids and saying, no, you can't play with us. So it backs for the question of what kind of narratives have we been told, right? The narratives told at the playground, that child grows up to be a teenager. How are they treating those around them when they exist in their schools? And then how are they transferring and reiterating and mirroring those narratives as behaviors that creates impact, right? Now, and all of you brought a really great point, where women of color still pin against each other, right? There's colorism over that. And I want to identify this topic. I want to find solutions. How can women of color become allies? How can we create allyship? How can we create sponsors? How can we create partnership through hardship? I want to hear your thoughts on this.
I think one of the best ways to illustrate how we can create allyship is just the simple understanding that if we don't do it for each other, no one is going to. And so we have to be able to be bold and be able to stand up for each other, because we're still, unfortunately, operating and working for corporations, places that are still very antiquated. I think that in the way that they're socially constructed, and it's unfortunate, but it's a sad reality. And so I think that oftentimes all we have is that camaraderie, that connection that we can have with our other, colleagues that look like us, that are also, POCs and professionals as well. Like, I think that's part of the nurturing component that we need to be able to embrace.
I think for me, and this is something I've spoken on before, and something I'm starting to realize, it's like, and I don't know if you all have answers because I'm still, struggling with it myself, is navigating in this person of color context that I think is very powerful, right? And that there are so many microaggressions that we experience. But how do we foster an environment where every subgroup that constitutes, a person of color is able to own their unique experience, and instead of expecting it all to be one shared outlook or one shared experience, or a synonymous set of microaggressions or racism or whatever it may be, discriminatory practices that we encounter. How do we create spaces for those subgroups and for them to own those spaces, but for us to still support each other, if that makes sense? So I'd love to hear ideas about that, and I'm still ruminating over these things myself.
So Deja, I think you talked earlier about creating your table, right? And but while you're creating a table, making sure that you have diversity and inclusion in mind, because even though that we're all women of color, we all have our different stories and our backgrounds, right? So making a space to be able to learn from those who are different than you, because we all have different stories, but also to also make it known that you're there to help and keep an open door. So by like mentorships and coaching people, knowing that like, hey, I'm here if you need help. Like, my door is open. I am I'm struggling with similar things that you are. Let's talk. And that's why I really love having these conversations with like such diverse panels, because it really increases the volume of women of color.
Yeah, I completely agree with Melanie and Deja as well. I feel that at the end of the day, it's to me what allyship looks like is it would be dual streams, right? So, firstly, we have to be united within our own diverse, pool of women of color, because we are all coming in from different backgrounds and nationalities and different lived experiences. Let's put it this way. But end of the day, even within our women of color groups, I see fractions. Like sometimes you will, see people from certain languages coming in together, which is fine. But what I'm trying to say is that we need to do even better to come together, everyone, regardless of our differences as well. But when it comes to having a more united front, that's when I think we get stronger together as a big group, and it's not just divided into small groups, and we're all just containing within each other. So that to me is actually a very powerful way of putting it, because end of the day, I feel personally, because I'm coming in like from Singapore and now I'm settled in Melbourne, Australia. I feel that within the Asian context, because Asia is a really huge continent. You have South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and so on. But when I look at certain Asian groups, the representation seems to be coming in mainly from East Asian communities or those who speak Mandarin. But where I'm coming in from, Southeast Asia, Singapore and Malaysia, for instance, we are multilingual, multiracial. And you have Chinese, you have Malays, you have Indians. So where are the rest of us? So we have different language groups. And that's what I'm trying to say. It's about finding a unity. It's not about fighting for your own rights only, or keeping it to your own self simply because you speak the same religion, or you speak the same language or share the same religion. So put aside our own differences before we can start talking about allies from outside helping us and mentoring us, etc. So that's what I'm trying to say here. Yeah.
I also I agree with all the points that are being said right now. I also think there's an element of having these difficult conversations um, outside of our community as well. So if I think about myself, I'm usually the only Black woman in tech at my level, right? So there's really no one else to partner with. I partner with my other minorities, or I just come home and partner with my girlfriends who I can actually vent to, or have conversations about things that they can relate to. So there's that element of grouping together and bonding as minorities, and putting aside things that putting aside our differences. But there's always also that element of having that difficult conversation in that environment where it is difficult, where you're having these somewhat abusive situations, and really bonding one as females and starting there and saying, the type of things that we've been experiencing as women, just putting perspective to it, right? Giving perspective from my side, giving perspective from their side, and just holding them accountable, right? And I think what we're seeing today with everything that's happening in the States, and here we're in Canada, and here that in Canada as well, is more people taking accountability for their actions, more people taking accountability for systematic racism that's already established, that hasn't been looked at forever, right? So I feel like accountability and difficult conversations is where change is initiated.
Gia, would you like to add anything else? You're muted.
I think definitely it takes for courage to not just find that mentoring relationship within those that look like us and that are on the same struggle with trying to fight the same systems that oppress us. And I think nowadays it's becoming definitely more easily to find those that we can rely on and count as allies as well. So it's very comforting in that aspect to know that a lot more people are being outed for going against the what is socially acceptable or what should be socially acceptable.
Such beautiful hearts, such beautiful minds. And I know that we're running out of time. And I leave with these words with all of you. Discrimination and bullying destroys the possibility of diversity, equity in spaces where humans shows up. When we are spending 70 to 80% of our wake time at work, we have to understand how we have to create a safe space to accept everyone. And I repeat that again, we have to create a safe space to accept everyone. There can't be belonging without acceptance. There can't be inclusion without acceptance. There can't be diversity without acceptance. The current climate has brought to light on discrimination and bullying against colored women at the workplace. Discrimination or bullying of all sorts are unwelcomed and unacceptable. To build a sustainable culture is to build an evolving culture, and also please get rid of the narrative of culture fit. Evolution becomes possible when we question, challenge frameworks, behaviors. We speak up and adopt ships to sail together, like what all these women shared today. It becomes our social responsibility to dismantle discrimination and to enable each other from our deepest core, which is our beating hearts. If someone tells me that you don't have a beating heart, I do not know whether you were created by AI, artificial intelligence. But as women, we have to come together as one. And that is what hardship looks like. That's what sponsorship looks like. That's what partnerships look like. And that's what allyship looks like. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. Each of you are brilliant. And oh my God, if I could hug all of you, I would hug all of you. But thank you again. But stay online. Stay online. Well, for those tuning in, please do join me again next week on part 2, dismantling discrimination and enabling diversity. The part 2 conversation is going to be a little bit harder. Very uncomfortable conversation. I've invited people who disagree and see from a different lens. So it will be really interesting. But nevertheless, please join us. Give it a like, subscribe on YouTube. I have to say all the subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, Mila Duchamp. And thank you again, all those beautiful minds. Shireen, where can we find you?
So I can be followed on LinkedIn, under Shireen Simon. That's pretty much it.
Melanie, where can we find you?
So anyone can find me at Melanie de Guzman on basically all of social media and the World Wide Web.
I'm available through social media, so whether it's through LinkedIn or Facebook, you're welcome to reach out.
Hi, I'm available on LinkedIn, most active on LinkedIn. You can find me at Ramya Sivakumar Bala. Yeah.
And I'm also available on LinkedIn. It is my bread and butter. So go ahead and search my name. I don't think there's another Nadeja out there. So I should be the only one. So yeah, add me, message me, let's chat.
So if you missed that, I'll be reposting this. I'll be putting everyone's link on YouTube, everyone's link on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. Since they're active on LinkedIn, I'll just link everyone on Twitter. Again, stay online, ladies. Thank you again for joining, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being, being aware and being in presence. So I'll see you next week for part 2.